Cops of Reddit, what's the weirdest thing you've ever had to arrest someone for? Someone turned themselves in for stealing a balloon on Free Balloon Day. My old man told me a story about how he arrested a serial public masturbator. The guy would literally jerk off in a massive trench coat, and as he was close to the money shot he would run over to bus stops and ejaculate on people of the public. It got pretty bad as the police couldn't find him and had no hints as to where he would offend next. I think he targeted school children or younger women. This might not be what you're looking for, but a serial public masturbator who the police couldn't locate for weeks is pretty weird. I know a cop who had to arrest someone for public masturbation at a truck stop back in the 90s. The man was doing it while looking at a Hot Cops magazine. When I was still in high school, I bought an IBC root beer, the ones in the glass bottle, and was pulled over by a cop while I was on my way to school. He asked if it was beer and I told him what it was. I handed it over to him so he could inspect the bottle. He looked at it, took a drink, and then walked away with it. TLDR. A cop stole my root beer. Edit. After he took his sip, he said you're free to go and walked back to his cruiser. Being 17-year-old me, I wasn't about to argue with a cop. I mean, I'd never been pulled over before, so I just pulled out onto the road and went to school. My father once had to arrest a 70-year-old man who was attempting to drive his granddaughter's toy Jeep on the highway, naked. He wasn't senile. I have arrested a man not once, but twice for having sex with a dead white-tailed deer corpse. He likes fresh roadkill for some reason. A friend of a friend has a mental disorder that leads him to do strange things sometimes. He was once arrested for being in a bathroom on the campus of a major university flushing for Jesus. My boyfriend went to a house party in ID with his ex. Everyone was wasted. He and some other dudes got into an argument. Someone called the cops. Boyfriend figures that if he stays there, punches will start flying. So he literally asks the cops to just arrest him so it doesn't blow up. They took him to jail for the night, with a bail of $10. My buddy is the sergeant of police in my town. He said he had to arrest a guy for eating the concrete under a bridge in my town, back in the days of bath salts. Another time was he had to arrest a guy in a hotel parking lot. The man was in the bushes, naked, and covered in blood, only wearing a condom. Pretty bizarre stuff. A guy I know is a Washington State Patrol outside of Spokane. Driving down I-90 he sees a car driving erratically, feathers coming out of the windows. He pulls this guy over, and the guy is having sex with a Canada goose while driving. Duck Spokane and everyone in it. Edit. It's not Canadian goose, it's Canada goose. Hey, every Redditor ever. As I was walking down the sidewalk, I saw an older, 60-something, bicycle rider stop, get out of his bike and pick up a beer bottle that was in the gutter. He put the bottle in his back pocket and get back on his bike and continued to ride at me. Just as he passed me, a cop car passed him, pulled over, and the officer stepped out and ordered the guy to stop. The policeman informed the bicycle guy that it was against the law to operate any vehicle on a public thoroughfare with an open liquor container, and he was being arrested for a violation of that law. I tried to come to the guy's defense, but the cop threatened to arrest me if I tried to interfere any further and told me to tell it to the judge tomorrow. The guy was allowed to lock his bike to a signpost and was hauled away. So the next day, I showed up at traffic court. The guy was second up. The judge read the charges and asked the guy how he plead. The guy said, "Not guilty." Asked to explain the situation. The cop said, "I observed the defendant riding his bicycle on 2nd Avenue South with a beer bottle in his back pocket, which is a violation of the open container law." I stood up and asked the judge if I could speak as a person who was witness to the event and had spoken to the officer during the arrest. The judge asked the policeman if I had indeed spoken to him. The said I had. So the judge allowed me to speak. I told the judge that I had witnessed the man pick up the bottle, put it in his back pocket, get back on his bike, and was quickly stopped by the officer. And then I asked if the bottle was empty. Did the bike guy smell of alcohol? Had a blood test or breathalyzer test been administered to the man? The cop answered no to all of my questions. The judge apologized to the man, dropped all charges, and admonished the cop. Edit. It appears from many of the comments that people have never been to a bail hearing at traffic court. It is a rather informal situation. Most people have not yet had opportunity to contact a lawyer, and the judge may allow people to speak on behalf of the accused if they address the court in a civil manner. Many cases are dismissed at this stage if the judge decides the case is frivolous or unsubstantiated. If you are ever asked by the judge in this court to plead guilty or not guilty, it is in your best bet to say, not guilty. That way you can consult an attorney. My dad was on World's Dumbest Criminals. He arrested a guy who kept checking out books at the library, then knitting in them and returning them. I have a friend who is a federal probation officer and specializes in sex offenders. He always has crazy stories of stuff you never even thought might be real. He had one client who had been arrested for anally douching with Dr. Pepper in the bathroom of a Roy Rogers restaurant. Apparently this had happened several times. I guess people with those proclivities are very specific with place, time, douching agent, etc. So it was not difficult to catch him once they figured out his pattern. My old man had to arrest a guy for pissing on someone : seemed relevant. More than Ohio man arrested for having sex with inflatable raft for third time in 3 years. More than that's when a mother and her 8-year-old child reported seeing Bergner naked while having sexual relations with a pink rubber pool float. Source: wasn't a cop yet and was unable to arrest because I was laughing too hard. Camp Butmit, Sarajevo, late 90s. I witnessed a local steal a roll of razor wire. He threw it on his back and started to run away. He was only wearing jeans and a thin t-shirt. No protective gear at all. That razor wire is the really evil nightmarish stuff. Pretty hard to untangle yourself once your clothes and skin get caught in it. His brave escapade soon devolved into whimpering, blood and little baby steps down the street. He really did get away with it though. Before I could wipe the tears of laughter from my eyes he was gone. A guy once hacked his way to the front page of AskReddit with only 6 comments. I was the manager of the city pool. Had to call the cops to arrest a man for forcefully baptizing all the kids in the pool. I cleared the pool, but he wouldn't get out of the shallow end. The cops finally got into the pool, so he swam to the deep end. Cops figured he'd get tired eventually. In the end it was uneventful, but the standoff was kinda strange. Not a cop, but me. I got arrested for putting up a poster for a lost cat. It's not something you can arrest someone for. But they put in handcuffs and brought me to the police station. The top cop asked the cops who arrested me why, and when he found out, he told them to take off my handcuffs, which they didn't want to do, and pretended they had lost the key. The other cops took their keys and took off my handcuffs, then they let me go. These were before the days of all of these police public committees. They did it because I was a gorgeous woman who rebuffed their advances. Not so gorgeous anymore. Sniff. Boo-hoo. Not the cop, but I was the person arrested. It was the final day of my senior year in high school. There were rumors of a food fight, so once lunch came around, our principal got up in front of everyone and shut it down. Behind him, a couple of the special ed kids started to throw their food and everyone joined in. Teachers were hit. Kids were hurt. I had already eaten my lunch but my friend had an apple, so I grabbed it and threw it as far as I could against the opposite wall. Come to find out, they caught me on camera and the new chief of police wanted to set a precedent, so despite never getting so much as a detention from K-12, I was arrested for disorderly conduct the final day of my senior year. TLDR. Threw a single apple in a food fight. Was charged with disorderly conduct and between court fees and my lawyer, it cost me $800 and 24 hours of community service. What is my perfect crime? I break into Tiffany's at midnight. Do I go for the vault? No. I go for the chandelier. It's priceless. As I'm taking it down, a woman catches me. She tells me to stop. It's her father's business. She's Tiffany. I say no. We make love all night. In the morning the cops come and I escape in one of their uniforms. I tell her to meet me in Mexico but I go to Canada. I don't trust her. Besides, I love the cold. 30 years later I get a postcard. I have a son, and he's the chief of police. This is where the story gets interesting. I tell Tiffany to meet me in Paris by the Trocadero. She's been waiting for me all these years. She's never taken another lover. I don't care. I don't show up. I go to Berlin. That's where I stashed the chandelier. Edit. This is by far the most up votes I've gotten on anything. Whoa. When I was a corrections officer, I booked a kid in for chicken at large. Arrested a guy that ducked a dog. 3 months later arrested him again for the same thing. Not a cop, but used to handle clearances, so I had to read all the MP blotters. The most awkward reason I had to tell a colonel that our SFC needed to have his clearance pulled was because he was driving around off base hollering at women and wanking it. This was in a foreign country and he yelled out to at least 5 women. He was apprehended at the gate and they found semen on a rag, his visor, and his windshield. I also found out that this was not the first time he was arrested for this kind of thing. We dubbed him the Mad Wanker. I'm a reporter, not a cop, but I do read through the police reports every day. In our small town, one man keeps having his house broken into. The burglars eat all the man's honey buns, put a cigarette butt in the toilet, piss on it and leave. They never do anything else. The police have never caught who's doing it, but it's been happening every few months for years. Some blokes who were making a film looking for some kind of divine cup of some sort. Can't have that. Now can we? Not a cop but my sister-in-law is. She got called out because a woman was breastfeeding a litter of puppies in the street. The women couldn't even produce milk, so basically she was letting a bunch of pups lick her nipples in front of her neighbors. A friend of mine got arrested for failure to appear after getting caught fishing without a license. The cops had a good chuckle with us. Domestic violence. Dude had no legs and one arm. Naturally he was coked up and beating his wife. My dad arrested a dude for charging at him with a machete. The dude was already wanted for beating his wife, but nobody told the department that he had a ducking machete. He had 2 other officers with him at the time, so they all tasered him at the same time, and were able to take him in without putting a bullet in him. And yes, meth was involved. My uncle was a cop and he said he once pulled someone over for playing violin while driving. My friend and I were driving cross country and I really had to pee, but my friend wouldn't pull over. We had just rubbed some country folk the wrong way and he was scared. I see empty bottles on the floor and start peeing in them. The first one fills up fast, so I have to use another, and another. Anyway, the cop pulls us over because he sees the bottles. I try and stop him from tasting it. He didn't believe it wasn't alcohol, but he did it anyway. He swished it around in his mouth and then started dry heaving. Told us to leave, so we did. Almost got arrested but didn't. I think he was embarrassed or something. I arrested someone for shooting his own house with a gun before. He was playing with it and shot the floor from the 2nd story and it ended up in the kitchen. Lots of people were down there. It's a miracle he didn't kill someone. Of course the people down there didn't want me to arrest their family member but duck it. He could have killed someone. I took the gun and arrested him for shooting at an occupied building. A felony. I don't think he actually faces charges, but I wasn't about to let that slide. An officer I know was called in during a domestic dispute and the guy came out holding his testicles in his hands. His wife had slashed his scrotum open and they were dangling. I'm not a cop, but my close buddy of mine had a dad who was a SWAT officer in Orange County. He said one time they had to arrest this guy who would put on a rain jacket and hide in the tank of a porta potty waiting for people to relieve themselves on him. Ugh. When I was a cop, we arrested a guy that had laid on his back and stuck his face under a woman who was looking at potted plants, and he sniffed her ass. When he was placed under arrest, he looked all confused and asked what about that was illegal. I didn't do anything wrong. My cousin had to arrest a girl who was either drunk or high off her ass, running around a neighborhood completely naked and covered head to toe in pink paint. She decided to make some nice prints on his car before he could get the cuffs on. Not a cop but no one. Here's what happened. A married guy was in bed with his wife and he said he had to use the bathroom. A couple of minutes later the wife found him having sex with their dog. In my city we had a fella with mental health issues. He started to drink and take drugs, making his behavior more erratic. I locked him up 3 times for assault. The assault being shoving his finger up his own itty ass and rubbing it in the face of passers-by. He tried it with me, but the drink and drugs slowed him down enough that I could drop him before he wiped me. I got caught for having sex in a public park in my high school years. Fun times. Cough cough. I used to work at a juvenile detention center. We had a young kid, maybe 10 or 11, brought in for hitting his house with a broomstick. Hopefully everybody doesn't know about this already, and hopefully I don't crash the poor site. Police log I believe is no longer being published and is therefore probably a financial burden to somebody out there, but our Carter police log is probably the best thing on the internet. Set aside at least a week. There is a lot of it and you will not be able to leave. Neighbors called. When I arrived there was a guy running around his backyard, drunk, with his pants around his ankles. He was chasing a stray dog that he cornered in his yard, trying to get his rocks off. Well, my uncle got into a car accident. Wasn't even his fault, was the other person's. Anyway, he got really angry. Like so angry he was arrested for terrorism. Yeah, that's my uncle. Only middle-aged white dude to get arrested for terrorism. Stealing 20 tons of Nutella. My old roommate got arrested because he had an empty bag of weed on him. There were a few specks in it, like a few grains of sand, sort of small. Not a cop, but I was once stopped by a cop because I was carrying a cello home from the bus stop. Must have been a big wave of cello robberies, or something. Not a cop, but I looked after the IT for a sheriff's department in the middle of nowhere here in the south. So they'd often tell me about their job when I had to do maintenance and talk them through simple tasks. A trucker, drunkard, had one too many during his rest break and decided to sleep it off in his cab. Only he didn't get into the sleeper part of his cab and ended up falling asleep in someone else's cab from the same national haulage firm, Small Bladder, who was only stopping for a bathroom break. Small Bladder came back and didn't notice the drunkard in the back and sets off on his route. Drunkard wakes up 6 hours later and thinks he's being hijacked and tries to strangle Small Bladder. Fight ensues and the truck comes off the highway and ends up crashing. Both of them have almost no memory of the crash or what happened, and it took the cops a week to figure out how they had 2 truckers for the same company but only 1 truck. Too late and not a cop, but my ex-uncle-in-law has special needs. No one seems to know specifics, but he has the mentality of a 6-year-old. Anyway, when his parents would travel, my mother-in-law was his contact person and he would inevitably end up in trouble and she would get called. My 2 favorites were when his girlfriend, who has Down syndrome, told him to bring her snacks, but he had to wear his Halloween costume. He is a 5'10", 200-pound guy, and his only mode of transportation is a bike. So he rode his bike, in April, 8 miles across town, wearing a skeleton costume, all black with a skull mask. He went to a Circle K to buy snacks and came out to every cop in our tiny town in the parking lot with guns drawn. It took about an hour to straighten out, and I think he only escaped being shot because someone recognized him when he took his mask off. So he was taken in for inciting chaos or some such thing. The other time his girlfriend wanted him to come sleep at her house, but he can only sleep in his own bed. The obvious solution was to carry his mattress over his head the 8 miles to her house. 4 miles or so of the trip is on a highway, so 7 different people called to report a man carrying a full-size mattress down the side of the highway in the snow, almost causing several wrecks. They had to call a trooper in on their day off that had a pickup truck to take his mattress home for him. Serious tag needed. Hell, we just need a Syracuse credit sub. When I worked for a state park, the ranger I worked with had a story about having to arrest a man who liked to hide in bottom of outhouses. Journalist here, not cop. I once had to write an article though about a guy who was arrested on a charge of illegal dumping and a charge of public intoxication. It was a fairly small, sleepy town, so small things were pretty big talkers. This guy though, the police chief told me that officers got a call about a really loud screeching sound along a street. Officers went to a corner nearby, and sure enough, heard a terrible screeching sound, like metal being dragged on concrete. They pull around the corner and witness a pickup truck just dragging a boat behind it. No trailer or wheels attached. and they saw him just unattach the boat and leave it on the side of the road, and he started driving off. Cops pull him over and ask him why he ditched the boat on the side of the road. He told them he tried to take it to the local recycling center, but they wouldn't accept it. He didn't want it, and just decided to leave it on the side of the road. Not me, but my husband. He got called to a scene to deal with a drunk and disorderly individual. Not at all unusual, however. In the process of arresting this particular individual, my husband has the cops called on him. Mind you, he is in full uniform. Apparently this man's girlfriend was none too happy about the fact that he was getting arrested and was yelling at my husband and his co-workers. When they proceeded to ignore her, she then called 911 and told them that she was surrounded prominently by Hispanic males and did not feel comfortable. It was my husband and his co-worker she was referring to. He's very obviously not Hispanic and his other co-workers were all Vietnamese. So they got on their radios and told dispatch to disregard. She then called 911 and said that she needed the fire department because she was on fire. Needless to say, she got to go with her boyfriend. TLDR, lady got arrested for calling the cops and the cops. I work at a casino. We had to call the police for this little old lady who is self-excluded, banned, don't remember which, probably a dozen times over the years for trespassing. They've actually arrested her a few times. Sad and comical at the same time. She always leaves with a big ass grin. So I personally am not a cop right now, planning to be, but my dad told me this story one time. It was a dark and stormy day. My dad was sitting in his patrol car drinking a nice cup of coffee when a call came over the radio about a man running naked through the street screaming at lampposts. When he got there, he saw the man rolling on ground in a dirty puddle next to a lamppost screaming, "They won't get me. They won't get me and my violin." It was pretty eerie if you ask me. Apparently he took a lot of different pills and snorted some sugar. Bought a 3-month-old baby from a woman on the street in Washington, D.C. when I was an undercover detective there. Not something that he arrested someone for, but the oddest thing my dad, cop, has told me was that a lady who was in custody accused him, the police, of killing her dad and her badger, as in the animal. I had a cop search my backpack once and found a couple of beers and a box of condoms. I was with my friends at the time, so he was like, "Why are there 3 beers? A box of condoms and 2 dudes?" I was speechless. My brother-in-law arrested Chad, the one-armed meth head, for trying to run over his grown children while screeching that the voices told him to do it. Chad's a special guy. Don't know if the cop was just being a D or not, but my buddy got pulled over for speeding in HS and he hadn't had a drink all night. He was taking a friend home that night and we live in the rural part of town, so going 10 miles per hour over the limit is normal. This night he got pulled over and the cop smelled alcohol in the car because his friend in the passenger seat was beyond wasted. So the driver gets pulled out for a sobriety test and the dude in the front seat wanted to listen to music and put the keys in the ignition but accidentally started the car. Cop proceeds to arrest him and charge him for a DUI. He was in the passenger seat, went to court and lost, and charged with a DUI. Charge him with drinking underage. But a DUI is insane. Still boggles my mind how his lawyer couldn't get him out of it. A man with a dish towel on his head, down by the airfield, yelling stuff about the Taliban and ISIS etc. He ended up going the psych route.